All right, so I think we now really understand what is going wrong with this event handler. So in this video, we're going to start writing out some code to fix this problem. Now, before we write out any code, I want you to understand there's probably like 5, 6, 7 different ways of fixing this problem. There are many different ways to solve this. So I'm going to show you a couple, and these are going to be the different ways that you and I most frequently are going to solve the issue. To show you the first way, I want to write out the solution to this original example that we put together over here very quickly to show you in very simple terms with very little code how quickly or how easily we can solve the problem. Okay, so first, way number one to solve this. We can define our constructor function inside of our class. Now, notice in this case, my class car is not extending anything. Because it's not extending anything, I don't have to call super. Not expected. You'll see that I even get an error message here because I am not extending anything. So no need for super in this case. So now one way I could solve this is by binding the drive function. To do so, I would say this.bind, or excuse me, this.drive equals this.drive.bind this, like so. And now you'll see that the instant I do that, I get the correct result from calling drive down here. When we bind a function, or call this.drive.bind, it's going to produce a new version of that function. So this right here makes a new function altogether. This new function that is created is essentially fixed with the correct value of this. So this right here creates a new function that is going to have always the correct value of this, or the value of this equal to our instance of the car. We then take that new function and overwrite the existing kind of broken, not fixed function that exists on the this.drive property. So this is one way right here to solve this problem. Define the constructor, bind the function, and then overwrite the existing one. You're going to see a lot of more legacy code solving this problem in this fashion. This is a way of solving this problem that used to be very highly recommended, and you're you're just going to see it very frequently. If you want to do it this way, that's totally fine. So let me now show you the next way. The next way we could solve this, unfortunately, cannot be written into this code editor because it relies upon a feature of Babel that is not yet edited, or I didn't implement it into this editor yet, sorry. So we got to go back over here and solve it in a different way. Okay, so back over here, the second way we can solve it is to turn the function right here that we are assigning to onFormSubmit into an arrow function instead. Just so you know, this right here, what you see right here, is essentially shorthand syntax for something like that. It defines a onFormSubmit property and then assigns it a function declared with the function keyword. Anytime they use the function keyword, that's always going to lead to a broken value of this. As I'm sure you're aware, we've got those nice, sweet arrow functions with ES 2015. One of the special features of arrow functions is that they automatically bind the value of this for all the code inside of the function. So we can replace this default implementation right here, or this usual syntax we've been using so far, with a arrow function instead. To do so, I'm going to use a very similar syntax to what we did up here with state. So I'll say onFormSubmit equals an arrow function like so. So very similar to what we have up here. The only difference is that this time around, rather than assigning an object, we are assigning an arrow function. So the arrow function is going to automatically make sure that the value of this is always equal to our search bar, or our instance of the search bar. So let's now very quickly save this and try running this code. So I'll flip back over to my browser, and here's our search form. I'll enter something inside of here, and then I'll hit enter, and now we see our term property right there without the error that we saw before. So that arrow function definitely solved the problem. So like I said, this is a second way in which you could solve this problem. So now you can understand we either use the constructor or we can do the arrow function like so. I'm going to show you one other way, and I'm going to only show you this other way because we've actually kind of technically already used it inside of this component. All right, I'm going to first revert the change that I just did right here back to how it was before. So very quickly, I'll refresh and just make sure I still see that error. Yep, okay, so I'm back to how I was before. All right, so now here's the third way. And we've technically already used this on the input right here. Notice how our input function, it has a callback, very much like what we have right here. But in this case, the callback gets passed down into that component using an arrow function. So rather than defining a method on our class using an arrow function, we just pass an arrow function directly into our props right here, or directly into the onChange prop. So we can do the same thing with onSubmit right here. I'm going to wrap onFormSubmit with an arrow function. So I'll put in my parentheses right there, I'll put in my arrow, and now I'm going to make sure that I invoke onFormSubmit. So why am I putting on the parentheses here? Well, remember, in this case, I'm now defining an arrow function and passing it down into the form. So when the form gets submitted, it's going to call the arrow function. So it's going to then execute essentially this little segment right here. Everything from this.onFormSubmit to the very end. So it's only going to, or the form is only going to invoke this arrow function one time. It's not going to invoke the arrow function and then get back the onFormSubmit function and then decide to invoke that. No, that's not how it works. Whenever we use the arrow function here, it's only going to call the arrow function one time. So now we have to make sure that we invoke onFormSubmit. All right, so now we'll try saving this and we'll do the same thing. I'll put some text in, hit enter. Oh, okay, I made a typo here. Where did I make my typo? onFormSubmit. I've got a typo. So, oh, it's the event object. My mistake. Sorry. We have to take the event object and make sure that we pass it into onFormSubmit like so, just as we did down here for the onChange. Okay, so let's try this now. I'll put in some text, hit enter, and yep, there we go. All right, so that's it. That's the 3 ways in which we can solve this. Now, in general, we're going to go with the route of assigning an arrow function like so. That's going to be the default method that we use to fix this problem. But in some cases, when we decide to inline a callback, as we did down here, we'll just rely upon this arrow function to solve the problem for us. All right, so now in this case, if we're going to use the arrow function up here, we don't have to put in the arrow function in the submit handler. Technically we could, but we don't have to do both. So I'll say this.onFormSubmit, and now I'm back to just passing in a reference to the function, so I do not need to add in the parentheses. Okay, so let's try it one more time just to make sure everything is fixed. And yep, we're looking good. All right, so that's it. It's probably way more than you ever wanted to know about context and these event handlers. But like I said, you will run into this problem. So let's take a pause here, continue in the next section.